Gamers have become less interested in strategic thinking and planning. And that's not a clickbait statement. That is literally the title of a study talking about this exact thing. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello, everyone. If you enjoy what I do, my coverage of strategy RPGs, strategy games in general, the gaming sphere writ large, and even things talking about the gaming sphere, even if they aren't exactly games in this particular topic, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, before you click away, this is a real thing. As of 2 days ago, at time of recording on May 21st, Quantic Foundry posted a report by Nick Yee going over their findings in terms of various different gamer demographics over the last 9 years, and how 1 out of 12 categories that they've been keeping track of via a self-reporting study has found that while all other demographics have maintained fairly stable levels of interest, strategy gaming in particular has fallen dramatically. And seeing as how we are primarily invested in strategy games around this channel, in particular turn-based strategy RPGs, obviously that's of particular interest to me, and I imagine a lot of you. So today we're going to be talking about this in 3 parts. First of all, we're going to go over the study itself, talking about its relevant points, the things that are perhaps the most interesting or important to note. And of course, I will have a link to the entire article in the description. I, as always, encourage you to read it for yourself to get your own insights. Let us know what you think about it. Then we're going to take the survey designed by Quantic Foundry that goes over these 12 different demographics of gaming, so we know exactly how they have it set up and can use that experience to compare back to the data that they've utilized. I encourage you all to take it with me if you've not already done so. The link to that will be in the description as well. And then finally, we are going to discuss the survey, the results espoused in the article, and what my thoughts are about all of that, and potentially what some of the causes behind all of this is. So, this article, Quantic Foundry, Nick Yee, very, very interesting insights. Very well put together article as well. I first saw some various different strategy indie devs buzzing about it on Twitter when it was first published. A lot of concern, anxiety, insights, discussion that is worth checking out. There's a fairly robust strategy RPG section of Twitter, and while yes, I say that fully knowing that Twitter, or X if you prefer, is a toxic cesspool, it is a good way to keep up to date with a lot of these projects that I'm of particular investment in. I, of course, wanted to throw my hat in the ring and discuss what's going on here because, you know, it's kind of important to me that people be continually interested in and invested in strategy gaming, as it's what I do here on the channel, and this is my full-time job. And also, I just want to continue to see strategy games be developed, and I'm hoping that developers aren't scared of doing so if there's this general lack in interest. So we'll have to see. Finally, one last thing that I want to say before we get into the article. I am someone who has done studies on gamers in the past. I do have a master's degree in communications studies and broadcast, and part of that was working with various professors on meta-analyses and papers involving interpersonal communication and the way that gaming impacts people's team building, teamwork, interpersonal communication skills, toxicity levels, aggression, etc., etc. A lot of interesting things there. Maybe I should do a video on that one day, but not the topic of this video. I just want you all to know that actually looking at data and discussing studies like this is within my wheelhouse, even if it's not normally what we do here on the channel. So I'm not just completely talking out my ass. With that said, the article. The data used by Quantic Foundry comes from that previously mentioned study, in which over the last 9 years, between June 2015 and April of 2024, 1.57 million participants submitted answers to this survey. Notably, Chinese submissions were omitted from this result because of the extreme disparity in their gaming profile. According to Quantic Foundry, I imagine they have very different views on gaming, something that the article itself points out, due to the more isolationist nature of the gaming scene in China. This survey is the Gamer Motivation Profile, a 5-minute survey that, as they say, allows gamers to get a personalized report of their gaming motivations and see how they compare with other gamers. There are 12 motivations that come in this model, broken up into 6 different categories. Action, which involves destruction and excitement. Social, which involves competition and community. mastery, which involves challenge and strategy, what we're looking at here, achievement, completion and power, immersion, fantasy and story, and creativity, design and discovery. As a whole, the data collected focuses on the Western core PC and console gaming market, as described by Quantic Foundry. Again, we're not looking at China here, and notably, I do wonder how this involves areas like Japan and Korea, because they say Western, obviously those generally tend to be considered more Eastern countries. Were they excluded from this? Because I feel like that could definitely be skewing these results. That's something that we're going to talk about at the end here. However, for the rest of the article, Quantic Foundry defines strategy as an affinity for long-term planning and careful decision-making, and gives example games such as Europa Universalis and the Total War series. Low strategy examples that they provide are Just Dance and Animal Crossing. Of course, Animal Crossing being a Japanese title, and them bringing up Animal Crossing here is interesting since, again, we've potentially excluded the Eastern market, but again, we'll talk about that at the end. Looking at the total results of this survey, Quantic Foundry found the following. They stated that many gaming motivations are stable with slight variations over a 9-year period, with the standout being strategy, which has dropped from the norm 50 percentile at the start of their data collection to a 33 percentile, a statistic which Quantic normalizes by making the comparison that a similar percentile drop in body weight, as something we can all pretty easily understand, in American men in their 20s would equate to all of us having lost 17 pounds over that 9-year period. So a fairly significant drop, if maybe one that most of us could afford to actually engage with, I'm sure. But that's not nothing. It's not anything deadly. It's not anemic. It's not something that we need to be extremely concerned about, but it is still a pretty big swing, and that's what makes this a noteworthy discussion. It's noteworthy as well, Quantic points out that the trend line of this decrease suggests that the decline happened before they began data collection in 2015, implying that this is a persistent pattern, something that has been going on for longer than 9 years. They say that this is indicative of a larger cultural and psychological shift, something that I do agree with. Again, we'll get into that in the end, but I imagine you all are already having some ideas about what this probably entails given cultural shifts, just since the rise of gaming as the biggest hobby in the world. It's worth noting as well that this drop is equal in both men and women who took the study, and is also similar when comparing gamers in both the US and other countries. So this is a fairly worldwide phenomenon based on the information gathered here by Quantic Foundry. As far as why this is occurring, Nick Yee did posit a few different ideas. He points out that this drop corresponds with the rise of things like short-form content on YouTube and TikTok, reduction in shot length in movies, and an increase in the speed with which we tend to switch between tabs on PCs or presumably apps on phones, although that's my own assumption that was not stated in the article. There is, of course, also the potential that the pervasiveness of social media has created not just shorter attention spans due to constant content spamming, but also an overall cognitive load on individuals due to the bombardment of negativity feeds, algorithmic intentions to shove advertising at you, constant negative news bombardments, etc., that has caused a lower desire for long-term thought due to this overload in our leisure time, something that is certainly possible. And again, we'll talk about my theories on that in the end, but it is a very fair assumption and guess to make, and I would not be surprised if it was at least partially part of it. Now, with the overall highlights of the article out of the way, and again, linked in the description, I highly recommend that you go and read it for yourself, especially if you're someone who's into reading charts and data and everything. Let's move over to this actual survey. Again, this link is also in the description. I highly recommend that you take this with me if you have not already taken it, just to get some more information out there, because it's always possible. It's just strategy gamers haven't seen this a whole lot. Not the most likely thing in the world, but hey, we may as well bolster our own results in the survey, shall we? And here we are, the gamer motivation profile. We'll go through all of this. I'll probably cut bits of it out to move through in a pretty speedy manner. This is a survey that is meant to take 5 to 7 minutes, according to Quantic Foundry. I do identify as male. I am 32 years old. In a typical week, about how many days do you spend at least 30 minutes playing a video game? How many days do I spend playing at least 30 minutes in a video game? Every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't spend at least 30 minutes playing a game, whether it be for work or just casually. Would you consider yourself to be a casual gamer, core to mid-core gamer, or hardcore gamer? I mean, I do this for a living, so I would say I'm a pretty dedicated gamer and play seriously or competitively. Which of these platforms do you usually play games on? Click all that apply. Console and PC, with a little bit of handheld, not as much time recently. Notably, they have PS Vita here, but not Nintendo 3DS, but I tend to play a PSP and a 3DS. What are some recent games released in the past few years that you have enjoyed playing? Well, this is going to be easy. Unicorn Overlord. Oh, look at that. They actually have it in here. Very nice. Elden Ring. Elden Ring GB. We're going to go with this. And then Fire Emblem Engage. How about that? Perfect. Are you currently playing any web/mobile/tablet games? No, I am not, as a matter of fact. Are there any other games that you've enjoyed playing recently? I mean, we can certainly continue. Loop Hero, just randomly pulling things up. Final Fantasy 16. See if they actually pull that. Yes, they do. Look at that. And oh man, I mean, there's so many other good options. Indie games, you know what? Let's get something a little different in there. Metroid Dread. How about that? That was a fun one. Obviously, this does not preclude any other games that I have not listed here. How important are the following game elements and activities to you when you play video games? Accumulating large amounts of in-game resources/currency. Not the thing that I care about the most unless it allows me to buy strategic things, but completing all possible missions and achievements in a game. I like to do side quests. Achievements I'm not as big on, so we're going to say somewhat important. Getting every possible star/trophy/unlock in a game. That is not important to me. I have platinumed one game, and it's Unicorn Overlord. Taking the time to practice and master a game. Extremely important. Absolutely. Getting to know all the main characters and their backstories. Also extremely important. Playing the game at the highest difficulty level. Very important. I don't always play on the max difficulty in any given game, but it's definitely something that I do tend towards. Making an effort to get every collectible item in the game. I'm not a big collector. Sometimes I will if they're tactically valuable, but discovering offbeat or unconventional ways to play the game. Absolutely. I love off builds. As you guys know, the Brave King Boucheron is 150% my jam. Acquiring powerful weapons and artifacts. Very important. Very enjoyable. Dominating other players. I get the competitive spirit sometimes if I'm playing something like a PvP, Destiny 2 Crucible type of thing, but it's not a driving factor. Taking on difficult challenges that may take many tries to succeed. I definitely do love that. I also love an elaborate storyline. Characters with interesting backstories and personalities, 100%. Pretending that I am someone/somewhere else. I'm going to say very important. This is something that's kind of weird because I don't generally get into RPGs where you can't make your own character in terms of pretending that I am that someone or somewhere else. I like to make choices that lead them through their story. If I can make my own character, though, if we're talking about, like, a Mass Effect where I can choose what type of Shepard I'm playing, or, like, Baldur's Gate 3 when I have a custom character and can very intricately guide their story, that is important to me, but it's not, like, I don't try and put myself in the shoes of the hero in Dragon Quest, you know? You see what I'm saying? So I guess I'll say somewhat important. Becoming as powerful as possible. The power drive isn't what drives me, although it is fun, so we'll say very important. Having many customization options, extremely important, especially if they're not microtransactions. How much do you enjoy the following game elements and activities? Being immersed in another world or place, greatly enjoy it. Gameplay that requires a lot of thinking and planning, absolutely. Using guns and explosives, I mean, it's certainly fun, but I'm just as happy doing some magical sword and board type stuff, so I mean, I enjoy it a lot, it's fine. Gameplay that requires long-term planning and strategy. Well, don't tip your hat too much here, or tip your hand, I should say. I enjoy it a great deal. Blowing things up, I mean, it's fun. Gameplay that requires careful decision-making, absolutely. Constant action and excitement. It doesn't have to be constant. Like, I do enjoy that. This isn't a matter of, like, how important is this to you, it's just how much do you enjoy it. So, I mean, I do enjoy it. Gameplay with lots of blood and gore, I definitely enjoy. An agent of chaos and destruction. That's honestly not as important to me. Like, it can be fun, but it's like, whatever. Gameplay that is fast-paced and intense. It's fine in certain situations. Things get a little twitch shootery sometimes for me. Working towards a common goal with other players, I do very much enjoy that. Competing with other players, I do enjoy when I do it. Gameplay that requires quick reaction times. It really depends. It really depends. Like, I am more of a slower shooter type of person, which is what a lot of these action-y type questions are filtered through in my mind. Although I guess things like your Elden Rings, your Soulsborne in general games where you need to dodge, parry, that type of thing also count. So, yeah, we'll say I enjoyed it a lot. Taking on the role of another character in person, I definitely enjoy. Helping other players, I absolutely enjoy. Going up against other players in duels or matches, I enjoy. Grouping up with other players, I also enjoy. I just like games in general, could you tell? How often do you do the following things when you play video games? Experimenting with objects in the world just to see what happens. Sometimes. I don't get as in-depth with it as people would expect in things like maybe Tears of the Kingdom, but study other players to improve my own gameplay. Not very often, honestly. I do not typically look to other people to learn. I tend to enjoy just the learning process myself. Put considerable time into customizing my characters, cities, and spaceships. Sometimes. Oftentimes, I just go for efficiency. Explore the game world just for the sake of exploring it. Oh, absolutely. Love that. Primarily focused on increasing your stats and level. Yeah, often. A lot of thought and effort into the character creation process. I don't put a lot in, I would say. I put enough to be happy. Try many different things to test what the game world lets me do. Yes, absolutely. Oh, and there we go. All right. I am a gladiator or ninja, apparently. Gladiator, dedicated hardcore gaming. Ninja, a duel of speed and skill. Ah, here we go. Okay. So this is where we see the idea of the two different factors that go into the major categories. So competition and community are pretty on par. Challenge and strategy are like nearly maxed out. Completion and power. Yeah, completion, not as big of a deal for me. I've always said I don't care about achievements. Social components, mastery. Okay, this is what we're looking at for strategy. Here we go. Gamers with high mastery scores like challenging gaming experiences with strategic depth and complexity. Gamers with low mastery scores enjoy being spontaneous in games and prefer games that are accessible and forgiving when mistakes are made. That is interesting. That is very interesting. We're going to talk about that at the tail end here. Challenge. Gamers who score high on challenge enjoy playing games that rely heavily on skill and ability. Yup. They are persistent and take the time to practice and hone their gameplay so they can take on the most difficult missions and bosses that the game can offer. I see a particular title here a little further down. These gamers play at the highest difficulty settings and don't mind failing missions repeatedly in games like Dark Souls because they know it's the only way they'll master the game. They want gameplay that constantly challenges them. Absolutely. 150% that is me. Strategy. Gamers who score high on this component enjoy games that require careful decision-making and planning. They like to think through their options and likely outcomes. These may be decisions related to balancing resources and competing goals, managing foreign diplomacy, or finding optimal long-term strategies. They tend to enjoy both the tactical combat in games like XCOM or Fire Emblem, as well as seeing their carefully devised plans come to fruition in games like Civilization, Cities Skylines, or Europa Universalis, which is less me. Partially because things like Civilization, I've always preferred to play with friends, and as anyone who's tried to play a 4X game like Civilization with friends knows, that is an incredibly hard thing to not only get set up, but then see through to completion. It is very time-consuming. So I don't have as much experience with things that are more 4X, but I do enjoy it when I play it, so it makes sense. Challenge: Super Smash Bros. Melee, Devil May Cry 3, World of Warcraft, Dark Souls, Counter-Strike, Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, Dota series, StarCraft 2, and Warcraft 3. A little older, some of these options, but I see what they're going for. Strategy: Europa Universalis 4, Crusader Kings 2, Civ series, EVE Online, XCOM, StarCraft series, Fire Emblem, Age of Empires, Warcraft 3, and Kerbal Space Program. Interesting. Okay, KSP being on there, that's cool. That's cool. And going through all the important things, that is the overall view of how this survey works. It clearly knows what it's talking about, at least in terms of profiling, because man, if it didn't have me pegged for the exact type of strategy gamer who enjoys a good challenge, that I am, and even called out the right types of games too. So I highly encourage that you take this survey if you have not already. It's an interesting little insight, gives you a lot of data that we didn't go over here in the video that you can check out. And it will help to expand their pool of research when it comes to strategy games in particular, since that is, of course, the main motivation of folks around this channel nowadays. Now, we've taken the survey, we see how it functions. I like it. I think it's a very solid survey. And we've read through the article and the information therein. So what are my thoughts on it? First of all, I don't think that the people developing strategy games need to be overly concerned. This is going out to all of my indie dev friends out there, all y'all who are working on such passionate, cool projects that are inspired by the strategy greats of our youth. Don't be discouraged. And the same thing for any AA, AAA devs out there. Don't be discouraged. Just because more gamers are entering the market with the new generations, with Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, does not mean that your strategy core is no longer there. It does not mean that we are gone. We are still here. The overall gaming demographic is still alive and kicking. From the oldest heads to people who came in probably like second generation, like myself, and probably a lot of viewership on this channel, we're still here and we're still hungry for games. The absolute clamor over things like Tactics Ogre Reborn, Unicorn Overlord shows that, no question. However, I can see where an influence on game design would come in, and this is the number one thing that I wanted to talk about because we've already seen it happen. Let's look at Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem, over the last 10-15 years, has become more and more casual, and this is something that we all know, right? Ever since, I guess, basically Awakening, the games have, in a lot of ways, gotten easier and less deep for the casual audience, while trying different things to maintain depth and intensity and to punishing strategic gameplay for the old heads who still want to be able to play those games. And the number one aspect of that is the turn wheel, the rewind mechanic that now seems like it is going to be a permanent staple of all Fire Emblem games going forward. This is the number one thing that I think is kind of going to skew people's perceptions of this discussion, because I know there's a lot of younger people out there who love Fire Emblem. You can look at all of the fandom discourse, all of the discussion about characters in Three Houses, in Engage, all of the discussion around the stories and gameplay of the Fates games. It is strong. There is a lot of love for those games, and as such, a lot of love for the Fire Emblem series, potentially more than there has ever been at any other point in history since the series' inception. However, it's important to look at what so many of those new entries into the series in terms of players care the most about, and it is stories and characters and the relationships between those characters. There's a reason that a lot of people joke about how Fire Emblem is a waifu or a husbando simulator or a dating simulator that happens to have a strategy game attached to it, that to some would argue is becoming more and more vestigial. However, I completely disagree with that. The gameplay of Engage, despite the game's other flaws, shows that there is an extremely strong and passionate strategy core there in terms of development. Absolutely. But these are facets that people love about Fire Emblem, typically the newer they are to the series and the younger they are, that never existed in the game's past. And along with that change in focus has come a much wider range of difficulty levels, and also a clamoring cry for certain staples such as permadeath to go the way of the dodo and be gone forever. We have our casual modes, we have our Phoenix modes, we have our no permadeath modes. We have people saying that permadeath is a terrible mechanic that never has a place in any game and should be removed outright from any game that has it, which is an absolutely insane take, and I pray to God that strategy game devs do not pay attention to such malarkey. It's fine if you feel that way. You're wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. That said, it is very clear that there has been an attempt by the Fire Emblem devs, as our primary example here, to make things more approachable and, depending on how you want to look at it, more casual, to bring in people who maybe don't want to have to think that far ahead, or don't want to have to deal with the consequences of their actions if they don't think that far ahead or do not plan things out properly. And that's where you have the turn wheel mechanic. That's where you have the rewind mechanic. That's where you have what is the single most divisive mechanic to ever be introduced to Fire Emblem over anything else and everything else, that has created a clear divide in the fan base for that series. And with Fire Emblem being probably the single most popular series of turn-based strategy games around, is a driving motivator and source of inspiration for so many other games going forward. It is clear to me that this trend down in interest in strategic thinking is real and is something that at least some devs like Intelligent Systems have taken note of and are trying to accommodate for. Does that mean that every game is doing this? Absolutely not. Of course not. We know how much people struggled with Tactics Ogre Reborn once it first came out. That is an older game, but it did get retooled to change a bunch of things. And if they wanted to make it simpler and more approachable in terms of long-term strategic thinking, they could have. There's going to be people that say that they did, and there might be something to that with the reduction in abilities and things, but that's less long-term strategic planning and more just overall information overload that they changed a bit there. Things like your XCOMs and the like. I mean, Chimera Squad, you don't really have permadeath, you have wounds, so that's something to consider. Things like Unicorn Overlord, you only have permadeath once you've cleared the game once, and you unlock it, and even then it's a pretty forgiving permadeath. So you are seeing accommodation for this trend, just maybe not as extreme of a way as we have seen with Fire Emblem. However, we're naming a lot of Japanese games here, and as mentioned, this study focuses primarily on the Western audience. And we know that beyond the indie scene, where you have a lot of people all around the world who are inspired by Japanese strategy RPGs of the past, I know those are not the only types of strategy games, we'll talk about that in a second, but that the vast majority of well-known popular turn-based strategy games come out of Japan. So I am curious to see what the demographic breakdown of this study is and how much influence the Eastern market had on it. Because I feel like that could make for a significant change. I'm not sure. That is completely a hunch. I'm spitballing right now, but it does make me wonder. Now, as far as other strategy style games are concerned, you have seen a significant drop in interest. I mean, look at the games that were mentioned in strategy gaming that weren't turn-based RPGs. The Civ series, which is ongoing, things like StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3, as like the premier real-time strategy examples, those are old games. There are people watching this video who are younger than Warcraft 3, I guarantee. It's possible there's people watching this video who are younger than StarCraft 2. These are old games. And yet they're the primary example being given in terms of real-time strategy games. That shows you. Devs don't want to make those games because there's no interest in those games compared to what there used to be. And one has to wonder if that isn't another indicator that long-term strategic planning with skill and confidence and competence required to get anywhere, especially if you're playing against other people, maybe not as much of an interest there as there used to be. Things like the Total War series, doing very fine for itself from everything I understand, and not my typical scene, but from what I hear on the grapevine, the Total War Warhammer games have done exceptionally well for Creative Assembly, and their other games in the Total War series are also doing just fine, to the point that there's rumblings and rumors of a Total War 40K on the horizon, which I will absolutely be playing if that happens. So there's different aspects of the strategy scene that seem to be thriving or withering, and I have to think that it probably has something to do with this. As far as causes, that is definitely a harder one. I do agree with the propositions that Nick Yee put forward about social media, about short-form content, about the shorter cuts in movies, or the shorter amount of time spent per web page or per app, definitely are indicative of a growing change. And we know that to be the case. Think of all the people who always meme about, I'm going to explain this more complicated concept in this video, so while I do that, I'm going to put the Subway Coin Runner TikTok video up in the left corner of the screen so that the zoomers don't lose focus on what's happening, keep them distracted while everyone else talks about what's important here. And it's like, yeah, that's a meme and it is disrespectful to the younger audience, but there's also a reason that that exists, and we have absolutely seen a reduction in attention span and an increase in interest in things that are flashier, faster, require more reflex and less thought. Does this mean that the strategy genre is going to die? Again, no. There's too many passionate people who just want to make these games for the people who want to play those games for the entire genre to die. Until all of us who are the core of strategy gaming, who've been playing these games for decades growing up and still play them to this day and have come back to gaming when a good game comes out, like so many people who are older than myself by a good 10, 20 years who told me that they came back to gaming because of Tactics Ogre Reborn. Like, the people crave for a good strategy experience, and they will come for it when it is something that exists and is good and that they can enjoy. Once this generation of people start to like retire and die off, as morbid as it is, maybe that'll change. But we're talking about something that's 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the line, if not more. So I don't think there's an immediate cause for concern. How will that change going forward? It's absolutely something that's worth paying attention to. But as far as indie devs, bigger game AA, AAA devs, stay the course. Do what you're doing, rock your magic, because we're all here for it and we're all hungry for it. And there's going to be plenty of people who are younger who also want to play those games. That is obvious. Like, that is very, very clear. It's not a completely dead market by any means, but those are my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I imagine that this is going to be a discussion that sparks a lot of interesting insights, especially if you guys feel like sharing the results of your surveys once you've taken them, which I would love to see. It would be cool to see what overlap there is with other styles of games, in the understanding that most of the people here are strategy gamers, but we can see what other types of stuff that y'all like to play. Because, of course, there's going to be people who play strategy games who don't play Souls-likes, who don't like that type of challenge like I do, but maybe enjoy other types of games that are more direct RPG fantasy-driven, for example. I'd love to see that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this study and this trend as well. I'll be in the comments discussing it with all of y'all and seeing if we can't come to a consensus as a community about what the heck is happening here. That said, though, thank you, Quantic Foundry, for putting this information together. Absolutely incredible stuff. Thank you to Nick Yee for the write-up as well and putting this out here for all of us to see. Great work. I hope that you continue to track this going forward. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.